Welcome to the ESL Rule webinar. This webinar will cover ESL rule and policy updates as of February 2025. As we go through this webinar, we will review the background, the definitions, anti-discrimination policies and practices, identification procedures, ILP requirements, ILP oversight requirements, direct service requirements, service delivery models, parent notification and rights, ESL staffing ratios, and exit criteria. ESL Policy 3.207 was converted into State Board Rule 0520-01-19. It first became official on July 6, 2021. In October 2022, it was revised to align with TISA. And then in May 2024, rule was revised again as Tennessee shifted from the WIDA Access Assessment to ELPA 21. The requirements within the rule are monitored annually by the Department for compliance through the results-based monitoring process. LEAs not meeting requirements under the rule will receive monitoring findings, which must be corrected, rather than just recommendations for improvement. This also applies to the policy, as rule refers to policy. Currently, we are under both State Board Rule and ESL policy. The policy includes entry and exit criteria or cut scores and the criteria for tailoring of services. Providing information specific to the assessment vendor in the policy allows the department and state board to update in a timely manner. Two new definitions have been added to rule as of the May 2024 version. Co-teaching instruction, which is the collaborative planning, organization, delivery, and assessment of instruction by a general education teacher and a teacher who holds an ESL endorsement that integrates content and language standards using an approved direct ESL service model. Co-teaching is not the same as push-in. Push-in is not an approved model, but co-teaching is. Co-teaching requires that the general education teacher and the ESL teacher doing the co-teaching also have co-planning, and that both the general education teacher and the ESL teacher are teaching all students in the classroom. The definition for pull-out instruction was also added to rule. Pull-out instruction is where a teacher who holds an ESL endorsement delivers intensive language support to EL students in small groups or one-on-one settings outside of the general education classroom using an approved direct ESL service model. Rule begins with anti-discrimination policies and practices. LEAs shall have discriminatory policies that preclude denial of equal education opportunities to individuals based on race, color, or national origin. LEA practices shall not result in the inappropriate placement of EL students or the exclusion from special programs or activities based on English language proficiency or national origin. This statement covers the appropriate placement of EL students in grade levels according to age, It also includes not placing EL students in special education programs based on English language proficiency, as well as not excluding ELs from special programs or activities based on English language proficiency. LEAs shall not deny enrollment to a student based on the student's or their parents' or guardians' actual or perceived citizenship or immigration status. Identification of EL students is a two-step process. Step 1, each LEA and public charter school shall administer a home language survey, or HLS, to identify non-English language background students. The required questions ask about the first language the student learned to speak, the language the student speaks most often at home or outside of school, and the language that is most often spoken to the student at home. If a language other than English is listed for any of the HLS questions, the student should be classified as a non-English language background student. Parents or guardians may need to be interviewed to clarify any discrepancies in the HLS. Discrepancies would be things like the first two questions being English and the third question Spanish. It may be that there's someone that occasionally is in the home that speaks Spanish, but maybe doesn't necessarily speak Spanish to the student. Other discrepancies may be when a family is observed speaking a different language, but complete the home language survey with English only. LEAs need to develop a set of questions that shall be used to clarify discrepancies in the HLS. It's very important that an HLS only be completed once in a student's educational career. If the student has previously attended another LEA, the receiving school or LEA shall attempt to obtain the original home language survey from the previous LEA. If the receiving LEA cannot obtain the original after reasonable attempts to do so, it may re-administer the HLS, but shall mark it as a secondary HLS. It's also good practice to document those attempts to obtain the original. If the original HLS is found, it shall replace the secondary HLS in the student's file. The reason an HLS should only be completed once is because the state has noticed when students move from LEA to LEA, often the home language survey is changed in the middle of that. So we hear of LEAs receiving a student who is L coded, but the new home language survey says English, 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 and it causes confusion. This is why the HLS should only be completed once in a student's educational career. Decisions about EL status are all dependent upon that original HLS. Step 2 in the identification is that LEAs shall screen all non-English language background students with a Department of Education approved English language proficiency screener. Unless an NELB student has documentation from a previous state that uses the same department approved English language proficiency screener, or a previous LEA that he or she met the definition of fluent English proficient on the screener. If a student comes from another state using the same screener, Tennessee can also use that screener score. However, if a student comes from another state using another English language proficiency screener, the Tennessee LEA must screen that student with the Tennessee Department of Education approved English language proficiency screener. The screener must be completed within 30 days of initial enrollment if the student enrolls at the beginning of the school year. According to ESSA, if the student enrolls after the beginning of the school year, the LEA has 14 days to screen the student. Please note that these are calendar days and not school days. Tennessee currently uses the ELPA 21 dynamic screener to screen all students. If a student has an IEP, the IEP team may exempt the student from domains that are inaccessible due to the student's disability. NELB students with a disability and NELB students who cannot access the traditional screener due to a suspected disability shall be screened using the alternate screener. If a student has an IEP, the IEP team may exempt the student from domains that are inaccessible due to the student's disability. First semester kindergarten students must take all 4 domains unless an IEP exempts certain domains. Kindergarten second semester through grade 12 also must take all 4 domains unless an IEP exempts certain domains. The qualifying score for entry for kindergarten first semester is below 3 in any non-exempt domain. The qualifying score for entry for second semester kindergarten through grade 12 is below 4 in any non-exempt domain. Students who take the ALT screener will have receptive and productive modality scores. The qualifying score for entry is below 3 in any non-exempt modality. Rule covers individual learning plan requirements. ILPs must have assessment data from the English Language Proficiency Assessment. They must include relevant demographic data, including years of ESL service, long-term English learner status, and additional services like response to intervention and individualized education programs. Data from other assessments may be included as needed. They must include strategies, accommodations, and scaffolding that provide access to instruction. These are decided by the ILP team and not an individual teacher. ILPs must include short-term goals in each of the 4 domains. They also must include growth trajectories based on individual student data. Some of the grade-specific requirements are in kindergarten through grade 3, direct ESL services and language-focused supports that provide access to classroom instruction aligned to grade-level academic standards. In grades 4 through 12, ILPs must contain direct ESL services and language, academic, and career readiness supports that provide access to classroom instruction aligned to grade-level academic standards. Students in grades 4 through 12 have a specific career readiness section of the ILP that must be completed. Transitional student ILPs outline services in accordance with a transitional EL status and needs. These include relevant demographic data, including years of ESL service, additional services, data from other assessments may be included. ILPs for transitional students do require short-term academic goals and career readiness goals for grades 4 through 12. They also may include scaffolds for access to instruction for grades K through 12. The ILP team must review and revise each ILP at least annually. Each LEA must have an ILP oversight plan. These oversight plans must include procedures regarding the development of ILPs, the monitoring of ILPs quarterly, the provision of intensified support for ELs not meeting their growth expectations, the annual review and revision by the ILP team, parent communication and involvement in the ILP process, the seamless coordination of services and supports for ELs with disabilities and/or characteristics of dyslexia, the training for teachers providing direct or indirect ESL services, and sufficient staffing and resources required to support the development and implementation of all ILPs across the LEA or public charter school. LEAs shall monitor authorized public charter schools to ensure compliance with ESL rule. Teachers shall monitor the academic and English language proficiency growth of EL students through benchmarking, progress monitoring, formative assessments, or summative assessments at least quarterly. Elementary school students must have a minimum of 1 hour of direct ESL service per school day from a teacher who holds an ESL endorsement until the student achieves a qualifying score for exit or a qualifying score for tailored services. Middle school and high school students must receive a minimum of 1 hour of direct ESL service per school day, or the equivalent of one full class period of at least 45 minutes in duration per school day, until the student achieves a qualifying score for exit or a qualifying score for tailored services. It is important to note that services are per school day, not a total minutes per week. The other important note is that the equivalent of one full class period should be the equivalent of a core class period. LEAs are required to notify parents. Parents or guardians of ELs shall be annually informed of the right to waive placement of their child in ESL programs. Each LEA shall provide the parent or guardian the option to waive direct ESL services before services are provided or at any time during the school year. If the parent waives direct ESL services, the general education classroom teacher shall be responsible for providing indirect ESL services in the form of linguistically appropriate accommodations and scaffolding within the general education setting as described in the student's ILP. It is important that LEAs take special care when discussing the option to waive services. It should never be a staff member from the LEA attempting to persuade parents to waive services. LEAs may give parents the option and explain both waived services and what that means, and ESL services and what that means. But the staff members cannot persuade parents to waive services or not to waive services. In addition to this, LEAs should be cognizant of when the waiver is offered to parents again. Sometimes in specialized meetings for intervention or IEPs for special education, that right to waive services is brought up, and well-intentioned staff members make it seem like it's an either or for services, and students have the right to all services that they need. Anytime a waiver is presented to parents, it should be carefully thought out and given to the parents without pressure to waive or not to waive. ESL rule outlines the required training for all teachers who provide direct or indirect ESL services. This training includes the Tennessee English Language Development Standards, which are currently the ELPA 21 standards, appropriate ESL instructional methods to use with grade level academic content standards in English language arts, mathematics, science, and social studies. English language acquisition training for general education teachers to understand the process of acquiring a second or subsequent language. Strategies for collaboration between teachers serving EL students so that ILPs are developed and implemented by all educators. And requirements regarding ILP development and implementation. EL students in grades 1 through 12 who score at least a level 4 in 3 domains, which shall include reading, writing, and either listening or speaking, may have tailored services. Please note that tailoring of services is based on the English language proficiency assessment scores, not the English language proficiency screener scores. ESL services may be provided through scheduled ELD aligned course instruction, through pull-out instruction, or through co-teaching instruction. Services may be provided in ESL classrooms, general education classrooms, newcomer centers, programs for recently arrived English learners, or virtual classrooms for virtual schools. The approved service models are sheltered English instruction, structured English immersion, specially designed academic instruction in English, content-based instruction, heritage language instruction, or another model approved by the department. To use another model approved by the department, the LEA must prove that the model is evidence-based and effective, and that it provides effective language instruction that meets the needs of ELs and demonstrates success in increasing English language proficiency and student academic achievement. It also must be aligned with the Tennessee ELD standards. Requests for another model must be approved before the LEA uses the other model. ESL students have a right to any other programs that they may qualify for. ELs who are suspected of having a disability must be located, identified, and evaluated for special education and related services in a timely manner in accordance with state and federal laws. LEAs shall consider language proficiency of ELs when conducting special education and/or Section 504 evaluations. ELs shall not be identified as students with disabilities solely because of their limited English language proficiency. LEAs shall provide EL students with disabilities with both the language assistance and disability-related services to which they are entitled under state and federal law. Neither response to instruction and intervention nor special education services shall be used in place of direct ESL services. For ELs suspected of having characteristics of dyslexia, LEAs shall consider the English language proficiency in determining the appropriate assessments and other evaluation materials to be used. ELs shall not be identified as having characteristics of dyslexia solely because of their limited English language proficiency. In addition to the ILP for English language proficiency, an LEA shall provide an ILPD to an EL identified as having characteristics of dyslexia. 2 high school ESL courses shall be counted toward the 4 English credits required for graduation. At least one of the ESL courses counted toward graduation credits should be counted toward credit in an English course with an end-of-course assessment. Additional high school ESL courses should be counted as elective humanities credits. LEAs shall communicate information related to identification, screening, and service delivery to parents or guardians of ELs in the language and method that parents or guardians can understand. Parents or guardians must be informed of the following: the ESL program type to be used, the length of time expected for completion of ESL services, how the student was assessed, and the options related to program types, if there are a variety of program types in the LEA. Notification to parents or guardians must also include the right to waive placement in ESL programs, the right to waive direct ESL service at any time, and the scaffolding and accommodations to be provided. ESL staffing ratios. LEAs shall provide adequate ESL staff to implement the chosen service model effectively. LEAs shall adequately staff their ESL programs to meet state and federal requirements. This includes having sufficient staff to ensure meaningful communication to parents or guardians, to identify ELs, and to monitor transitional ELs. ESL class sizes shall not exceed state-mandated grade level class size requirements. For example, if the state maximum for kindergarten is 25 students in a class, then the ESL teacher with kindergarten students in a pull-out setting shall not have more than 25 kindergartners in the class. The LEA-wide ESL program staffing ratio shall be based on an average of no more than 35 identified EL students per full-time equivalent ESL teacher, unless an alternate staffing ratio is approved by the department. Alternate staffing ratios may only be approved when the LEA can show adequate academic growth and proficiency with the EL student population and can prove that EL students are receiving the required hours of service. Request for alternate staffing ratios shall include the number of EL students served, the proficiency levels of EL students, academic growth of EL students, evidence that no school in the LEA is additional targeted support and improvement based on the EL subgroup, the most recent analysis for the EL subgroup for TCAP, the proposed staffing ratio, and the justification for the alternate staffing ratio. Alternate staffing ratio requests should be sent to the Office of the Commissioner. Exit criteria for the ELPA 21 summative assessment is a score of 4 or above in all non-exempt domains. The Alt-ELPA summative is for ELs who are identified on their IEP as requiring alternate assessments. Exit criteria is a score of 3 or above in all non-exempt modalities. Students who exit direct or indirect ESL services shall be considered transitional EL for 4 school years. Transition Year 1 and Transition Year 2 students must have transitional ILPs, are served in the general education classroom, and are monitored for 2 years. Transition Year 3 and Transition Year 4 students are included for EL subgroup accountability purposes. Each LEA is required to have a reclassification procedure. If a transitional EL demonstrates difficulty in the general education classroom or fails to meet ILP benchmarks, academic interventions should be provided by a general classroom teacher or a teacher with an ESL endorsement. Each LEA shall have a written reclassification procedure to be used for exited ELs in transition who require re-entry if academic or non-academic interventions are unsuccessful. This reclassification procedure must include parent consent. If a student was exited from ESL services by another state, the exit shall stand as valid in Tennessee. If you have questions about this webinar, please email me at hannah.gribble@tn.gov.